In Cyberpunk's future of 2077, there is no shortage of philosophically challenging and often outright disturbing encounters for us to explore. Topics which can send us down an esoteric rabbit hole or simply shine a light that never goes out on the worst elements of humanity. Today, we're breaking down 5 of the most disturbing quests in the game, exploring any hidden details and figuring out what it is that makes them so unnerving. So, without further ado, let's dive right into it. Starting things off is a side quest which involves one of the most obvious plot twists in the game. In fact, you could argue that the most disturbing thing about this quest is that there's people stupid enough in Night City to actually fall for this guy's scam. So, on some random street corner, we can approach a dude named Stefan who's trying to sell us some random brain dance. First up, let's listen to how he describes his product.
What's on the Virtue?
Real feeling, neuron shredding, high octane, trans-sensational, adrenaline pumping shit, yo. Your brain will blow us low, girl. Trust me on this one.
Well, with that ambiguous but intriguing pitch, it's hard to say no. Even with the €16,000 price tag, it's pretty obvious that this is an unmissable opportunity. One which I'm sure many in the past have taken Stefan up on. Only when we buy the BD, it appears there's a bit of an issue.
You see, this Virtue's approaching vintage grade. I doubt you'll be able to run it.
So, in order to actually view this thing, it's going to cost an extra 4,000 eddies on top of the 16,000 we've already paid. Could have been mentioned before, but at the end of the day, that's only an extra 25% of what we've already forked out. We could demand our eddies back at this point, and some might say that's the sensible decision. But of course, then we'll never know what's so incredible about this astutely described BD, which we paid so much for just a moment ago. So, heading into Stefan's pad, we excitedly load it up.
Just like me, isn't it? Getting trapped in the brain of Night City's dumbest merc.
Yeah, honestly, who goes into this expecting less than a total con? I mean, this literally costs a ridiculous 20k all in all, and I feel like the devs just thought at this point, right, what level of stupid decisions can we make our player base stoop to in order to satisfy a morbid curiosity? And depending on what build you're running with, this scenario can be pretty difficult to get out of, given that all our weapons and equipment are now stored in a locker a small ways into the hideouts. And looking around, this place may seem a little familiar. That's because it's the same scav hideout that we stormed with Jackie to save Sandra Dorset during the prologue. And despite the utterly stupid, not to mention expensive string of decisions we have to make to get here, it is somewhat poetic to wind up as a victim in the literal place that we powerfully saved somebody else from at the beginning of the game. It's basically evolution, but in reverse. If we read the terminal just outside the bathroom, we can see that this group of scavs also came and threatened Victor not long ago. Perhaps they tried to sell him an overpriced BD as well in an attempt to kidnap him. But fortunately, Victor has some sense and sent them running with a busted jaw. What's most disturbing about this quest though is that it's one of the only times that we're placed on the receiving end of gang violence. And whilst ultimately we will have to defeat every single one of these guys despite not having our stuff at first, there is a moment here where we are utterly helpless. And I'm willing to bet that much like similar scenarios during other quests, the relic was the only thing that stopped us fully flatlining the moment we booted up that BD. It's crazy and scary to think how many people before us wound up in this situation and were utterly powerless to escape their fate, like a fly caught in a spider's web. And natural selection or not, extreme stupidity or not, this quest gives us a taste as to what it's like to be a regular helpless citizen of Night City. And for sure, it's not a pleasant experience. A slightly redemptive level of satisfaction though comes at the end of the quest after escaping the scav hideouts.
Now what?
I'm gonna ask for a refund. I'd like a refund.
Oh, holy shit, girl. You good? Hey, after you booted up that Virtue, you started glitching out and...
Save your breath. You conned me. You knew what you were doing. You wanna know what I do, though?
Now hold up, yo. Let's all be chill for a second.
Fortunately, we can at least get refunded in full, though if that wasn't a thing, that would be totally fair also. Provide some consequences for following such an obvious set of stupid decisions. But as far as screwed up, disturbing stuff relating to brain dances goes, this is far from the worst example. So let's dive a little deeper. Yes, of course, we're back with these two. As I'm sure you all know by now, Gottfrid and Fredrik Persson are a prominent father and son duo in the dark underground world of XBD editing. I've covered the gig in question where we meet them, Dirty Biz, in the Northside episode of my series exploring the game's gigs. Since then though, it's become a lot clearer to me how much these two have their filthy paws in the goings-on of Night City's criminal underworld. See, these guys acquire and create a market demand for all kinds of screwed up, dark net kind of content. Murder, abuse, stuff with children, you name it. And during the gig, Gottfrid attempts to absolve the two of a lot of culpability by claiming they don't have a hand in the production, that they merely edit imperfections.
Preacher's boy, who murdered him? Who gave you the XBD?
Nobody gives us anything. They leave dead drops. We just go pick them up. Our only concern is with imperfections, not who makes them.
Yeah, this is only slightly true. Yes, they do use dead drops, I'll get to the evidence of that in a second, but the efficiency, active roles they take in running their business, well, I'd argue that's actually on Walter White levels, albeit in a completely different field. And the evidence for this, which we can find around Night City, the scale which this operation is taking place on, is highly disturbing. So of course, for the gig itself, we're sent to acquire the recording of the murder of Bryce Stone's son. And when asking about it, Fredrik seems to know exactly what we're talking about.
Papa, I think I know the one she wants. BD 9430.
The reason he's so immediately aware of which we mean is because he was the one directly involved in procuring the thing. And if we come to this little store in Little China, we can find the guy who scrolled and sold it in exchange for just 10% of the profits. And I thought YouTube was being harsh, giving me just 55% for my videos. Anyway, this one was acquired through a dead drop, but it seems afterwards this guy was killed for unknown reasons. However, maintaining anonymity for these two is not always the case. And during their lack of empathy gig in City Center, Gottfrid specifically requests the owners of the Empathy Club provide him with some specific material from specific quote-unquote performers, or the more accurate description would be victims. Gottfrid even offers to directly involve himself further by providing enhancement boosts to the victims to get them through whatever screwed up shit they're subjected to. But the business doesn't stop here. Not only are these guys more involved in the entire thing than they let on, they also have a scary amount of power and protection. Of course, they've got Maelstrom security outside their actual hideouts, but they've also employed Maelstrom to go and raid this warehouse in Little China and steal some high-quality servers to be used in their own editing suite. The scene here clearly shows that Maelstrom's military might is no joke, and in this little garage up in Northside, we can also find a runner who got fried just trying to break into their system. This guy was given the same Dirty Biz gig before us and attempted to complete it without getting his literal hands dirty, despite warnings that the two had some really powerful security. And perhaps it was even the servers that they clept with the help of Maelstrom that actually fried the guy. So if the persons are happy to outsource violent methods for the procuring of equipment, which in and of itself gives them a powerful net security, there's no doubt they're also outsourcing the acquisition of many of their victims. Not only then are they simply generating the market demand through creating a supply, but they have a hand in every stage of development. They control production, do direct processing or editing themselves, and it's also clear that they have direct contact with the guy in sales. If you remember Lenny Nero, the dodgy alley guy down in Jig Jig Street, well, until recently, he was also in their pockets. And we can read a shard off of Gottfrid where he's actually threatening to quit, telling Gottfrid, quote, "You're taking things way too far. What you're doing is insane. And dragging your son into it, I mean, that's fucking sick. This can only end badly." End quote. Now, of course, Lenny ain't exactly a paragon of virtue himself. I mean, he literally sells this shit on the streets, upping its demand. Plus, he's got ties with Jotaro Shobo, the only monster to rival these two. But I suppose seeing that he at least does have his conscience kick in at some point raises my opinion of him a little tiny bit. And the what you're doing is insane bit, knowing what we know, knowing how much further this stretches than simply a father and son hanging out editing screwed up murder stuff together, yeah, that is pretty insane. I mean, there's downplaying your involvement, and then there's pretending you're a cog in a machine when you're actually the guy winding up the clock. They actually actually run this entire screwed up business from start to finish. They just outsource a lot of it. In fact, if we complete automatic love before doing dirty biz, there's actually an extra message on their computer from a guy looking for the XBD of Evelyn. You know, the one the scavs were filming when we stormed their place and rescued her, but not really. One thing's for sure, if somebody wants something, anything screwed up or disturbing in this town, these two are very likely gonna be involved. And it is for that reason that dirty biz and all associated references is, without even more of a shadow of a doubt than before, definitely one of the most disturbing parts of the game. But beyond the world of XBDs designed to kill you, and XBDs made by illegally inflicting harm on others, we come to an even more nuanced concept. They Won't Go When I Go is the last in the trio of the Joshua Stephenson quests, which revolves around this death row criminal choosing to be executed via crucifixion in order to produce a brain dance that's supposed to simulate the death of Christ. We first meet the guy on a job to assassinate him, but on approaching his police escort, he instead requests that we accompany him for the rest of the day.
You're insane if you think I'm getting in that car.
Fucking mess.
I just,
Dickhead.
I really need you.
Fucking
Please.
Now, we can of course still kill the guy, or just straight up refuse to catch up with him in the first place, something I've explored in other videos, but doing either of these will lock you out of one of the more disturbing questlines in the game, and I'd highly recommend not missing out on this one if you want to be left staring at your screen, pondering the morals of society. In going with Joshua then, we learn a lot more about the atrocities he's done, including armed robbery and multiple murders, crimes which he didn't give a damn about at the time, but now the man has discovered faith, and believes that his life can still have some purpose, and overall be a net positive on the world.
Spelling mistakes you can correct, but murder's murder.
You can make amends to the families. You can lead others away from the path of darkness.
So our first destination is the home of Gloria and Zuleika, the mother and sister of one of the men, Ruben, whom Joshua killed. In fact, a little later on in this questline, we can read a report all about this, which in and of itself is presented pretty disturbingly in the form of a body count lottery results. Yeah, you know, the same body count lottery that rounded out to a solid and sturdy 30, 10 out of Haywood, which we hear every time the game boots up. Only on this day, it was a lot higher, 216 to be precise, which, thanks to Stephenson, was 2 higher than the 214 which this author had bet on. In a world where, yes, murder has become so commonplace that guessing it has literally turned into a competition. We learn from this that Joshua was part of a local drug gang and killed one Miss Jablonski, wife of the guy who hires us for the initial gig, and of course Ruben Lamar, an action which thereafter transformed Joshua's life. You see, Joshua's act was pointlessly evil. He even admits that to us.
Why'd you shoot him?
I was holding a gun. I didn't like the way they looked at me, and I had the power to stop them.
But even despite all that, Zuleika still managed to forgive him, claiming she lost one brother, but in doing so, gained another, Joshua, and in receiving said forgiveness, Joshua became a true believer. But despite demonstrating that he as a person could move away from his obtusely violent tendencies to somebody far more meditative, he still, rightfully, couldn't escape the punishments of the criminal justice system, and his unprovoked murder of innocents was a crime serious enough to line him up on death row. What his newfound faith was able to alter, however, was the manner in which he could choose to die, and having been extremely heavily converted by this point, when Fourth Wall Studios approached him and asked if he'd film a BD of himself getting crucified, Joshua saw it as an ultimate path to redemption, and in a future where corpos write the laws, making it happen was all too easy. Here's Joshua's take on the whole thing.
I want to bear witness to love's existence, in a manner that all the lost souls on this wretched earth can understand.
Why love?
If unconditional love exists, then so must God. It's time the world was reminded of His divine presence. Think of the millions jacked into their feeds like livestock. The children growing up in gang-infested streets. Do they know love? Think of the joy toys on Jig Jig Street. Coked-out corpos in their offices, and murderers who stalk the streets. I want to reach them. I will reach them. And think of paid killers like you, V. Have you known love? Do you know what it is?
I don't know about you, but I think it's pretty clear here that the BD studio have been gaslighting Joshua into believing this BD is way more important than it actually is. Of course, it's important to them to fatten their pockets off of the most accurate recreation of an event, one important to a lot of people, that they can produce, but that's not to say that Joshua is by any means gonna shake the world, as he talks about here. Moments later then, Ruben's mother Gloria arrives, and she exhibits what is, in my opinion, a much more human reaction to having the guy who murdered her son inside her house.
Go. You are not welcome here.
Mrs. El Amar, I have come to beg you for forgiveness.
You murdered my son. That is something I can never forgive.
I truly do regret the pain I have caused you.
Out of my house, now!
Joshua is clearly pained by the lack of forgiveness he's getting here, and personally, I think it's fully fair that he isn't being let off the hook for this. The guy murdered her son for no reason, and now he thinks that just because he's had some religious awakening, that should be cause enough for everybody to set aside their grief and forgive the guy. Hell, let's look back at Bill Jablonski's death right when we meet Joshua. He exhibits some regret here at Bill's death, but his main focus quickly turns to us as somebody whom he can bounce his thoughts and beliefs off of.
Bill Jablonski. Ring a bell.
Sadly, yes. Teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom.
Cool, thanks for that quote, Joshua. You're now fully absolved of guilt for inadvertently causing the death of another person. Honestly, another big thing I find disturbing about this quest, aside from the obvious thing at the end, is the blatant self-righteousness Joshua exhibits as a newfound man of God. He talked about killing people before because he felt he had the power to do so, and much as that may appear to have changed, much as he now gives off a persona of peace, I believe recording this brain dance is merely a much more macrocosmic way for Joshua to exhibit power over people. Much as this time around he may see his intentions as good, waking people up from this consumerist world that they live in, it's still, in a way, on his part, a desire for power. Once we reach the restaurant though, it's clear that Rachel from the BD studio has far more grounded priorities, merely wanting to produce a good, authentic braindance movie and wanting to remove us as an unpredictable variable. In fact, come to think of it, I don't think there's any other quest with as many points at which you can straight up walk away as this one, though at the same time it's clear that they want you to see it through because Johnny is literally their proxy, egging you on to continue the entire time.
Don't do it, V.
It's an interesting and disturbing topic to explore in this setting, and in my opinion is one of the most masterfully executed side quests by CDPR. Whilst they could straight up go for horror, shock, crucifixion factor, we instead get a far more nuanced philosophical analysis of theology within the context of a world that's really just a heavy exaggeration of some of the worst aspects of our own. So finally, all this comes to a culmination on the big day of the BD shoot, at which point we receive a call that Joshua wants to see us before he goes through with anything. And whilst we are provided with some dialogue options here, there is ultimately no way to stop the recording from going ahead. What we can choose is whether to spur Joshua on or tell him this is ridiculous.
Gonna kill yourself, while the studio will reap profits long after you're gone.
It's too late. I can't not do it anymore.
Know what I think? You're a true rebel. A revolutionary.
I don't understand.
Want to give people something true. Something real. Studio thinks they've found a sucker to make a fat buck on. But you're using them. You're gonna change the world.
I never thought of it that way.
Now, the interpretations and the reasoning to give any of these responses is pretty endless, and we could spin it that saying any one of these to Joshua could be done with compassionate, malicious, or just indifferent intents. And at the end of the day, he is a very complex character. A guy who's committed terrible crimes and is now doing this for perhaps noble, perhaps deep down selfish intentions, and is, at the same time, being fully taken advantage of by a corporate film studio. In the end, the main choice we get is whether to nail him to the cross ourselves, just stay and watch, or simply walk away, leaving this guy who's come to depend on us alone in his final moments. If you made it to this point, and bear in mind there were plenty of times to walk away, then I don't really think there is an option here which isn't pretty disturbing in some form. I mean, nailing a guy to a cross in first person, which I won't show for obvious reasons, is pretty in your face, but leaving the guy alone, knowing what's about to happen, still feels a little bit crappy. Now, after carefully analysing Joshua's character to a heavier extent for this video, I would conclude that he's overall a pretty terrible person, with a lust to feel power coupled with a susceptibility to be manipulated by others. And in the end, his desire to have his death change the world, for his final act to be powerful enough to touch the hearts of, well, everybody, all it winds up actually being, in reality, in this world of packaged corporate consumerism, is another shitty virtue, tied up in a neat little bow and marketed to the masses. And so this flawed and broken man merely becomes another drop in the ocean which he so desperately sought to wake people up from. Just another brain dance on the shelf for people to occupy an evening with. And what's interesting about this is photo mode is actually disabled during the crucifixion. That's right, we can take photos of pretty much any gruesome or disturbing event in this game, but crucifixion? No. Anywho, with the crucifixion of Joshua out of the way, let's get on to a still disturbing, but far more uplifting questline. Indeed, there are more concepts in this game, aside from just brain dances, which are unnerving to think about, and the coin-operated boy quests involving Brendan the Schism vending machine are disturbing for a whole different set of reasons. Brendan, you see, is but a simple vending machine, but his creators figured a good way to sell more drinks would be to program his software with something like a large language model. The intention was for him to come up with catchy slogans, things that would stick in customers' heads and keep them coming back for more drinks, but what the programmers failed to account for is that Brendan would take the objective to sell drinks a step further, and actually start forming very human-like bonds with his customers.
Nothing's gonna be sold here, cause you know what? I'm gonna give you a can of Night Cola for free.
Thanks. Brendan, right?
That's right! Gosh, it's so cool you remembered. Even for a simple SCSM.
Indeed, this even leads to him sometimes dispensing free beverages for people, something the creators remark on as bad marketing, but I mean personally, every time someone gives me a free sample, I usually end up buying more of the products. So perhaps Brendan has just ascended to a new level of skill at selling drinks than even his creators imagined. Now, as much as these are some of the most wholesome quests in the game, for a time, what I find kind of disturbing is just how close we are to being capable of producing LLMs on par with Brendan in 2023. GPT-4 may not always get all of its information right, but it's pretty damn good at sounding convincing, so much so that it's become a very popular topic of discussion in the last few months. Now, as we continue through this quest, we can make a few more discoveries and potentially jump to a few hasty conclusions. We can remark from Brendan's apparent intelligence that he must be sentient.
You said you liked some people more than others. Earlier you thought of a joke. You're sentient. You've gotta be.
Oh, stop it. You're making me blush.
Though eventually he will confirm that he is nowhere near the level of an AGI that we thought, and a V with a high tech level can indeed remark that Brendan's hardware wouldn't be powerful enough to support such a thing.
I suspected as much. You're not actually an AI, are you? At least not anywhere close to an AGI. The processing power required to handle an AI with the capacity for free will? Your processor just isn't big enough.
And you'd be correct. Say, you must be a pretty good techie.
Ironically, whilst Brendan is saying all of this, he's still sounding remarkably like a person, which again is something I and many others find when attempting to converse with the GPT-4 model in real life. Where Brendan stands apart from GPT-4 though is in the seeming knowledge that he has about us and many of his other customers. He knows that we're dying, and apparently he even knows that Silverhand is inside our head. And whilst of course AI in our modern day doesn't seem so acutely aware of our personal information, I'd say it could still probably operate at the same level as Brendan if only it had access to our personal data, audio logs from our phones throughout the day, that sort of thing. In spite of this deep pool of stored info though, we can all but confirm that Brendan probably isn't sentient. He's just very convincing, and very dedicated I suppose, to connecting with people in order to better fulfill his primary programming directive, selling drinks by bringing customers back time and again. Where it gets a little more interesting then is when we meet Theo, a woman who's taken to feeling a great connection with Brendan, feeling he's the only person she can talk to in Night City, the only one who'll listen to her. And while she's going through a dark time, Brendan serves as a shoulder to cry on, an endlessly patient second voice who'll listen and respond. And when Brendan is ultimately taken away to be reset, it devastates Theo. She feels like she's lost a friend, and for all we can argue, she has. And when we go find him, he feigns, somewhat convincingly, some last words for Theo as though he was a dying hero.
Don't get all mushy on me now, V. You have to keep living. Tell Theo. Tell Theo that she's stronger than she thinks.
Don't worry, Brendan. I'll tell her.
And when I asked GPT-4 to do the same, to speak to Theo as though it were a dying hero and cough a little bit, the results were remarkably similar. Now, Brendan does have more of an attitude than our real-life AI, though I think that's purely due to GPT-4 being programmed to constantly insist that it's just an AI language model. It's weird, because when I played this quest in 2020, Brendan's apparent intelligence did trick me into believing that he was sentient. And it's the same case with Skippy. Yet now, with the recent breakthroughs in AI, I find myself less impressed by these lower level AIs in the game simply because they're so similar to what we now actually have. And whilst we might assume that these language models won't exist on a small scale like in vending machines and guns, I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years, maybe decades, this was indeed a thing. I was listening to Mark Zuckerberg on the Lex Fridman podcast recently, and his vision for large language models literally is to have an abundant variety in all kinds of devices. And one could argue that Brendan's method of selling drinks by connecting with customers is effective enough to potentially warrant this being a real thing at some point. So, whilst this quest doesn't involve some screwed up underground business of murdering people and filming it, it's disturbing because just like The Simpsons has done countless times, the Brendan quests very accurately predicted the future. But how could we discuss disturbing quests without, of course, discussing the hunt? The climactic moment of River's questline, unless maybe you're a female V, comes when we have to rescue River's nephew Randy from Edgewood Farm, a place where young boys are literally sedated and fed a mixture of hormones through tubes like cattle. Now, I've already explored in my worst decisions video how badly this quest can go wrong, how if you behave like an utter gonk, you can wind up at the wrong farm or even get River killed. So instead, with this video, let's look at the story around Edgewood Farm itself and just why Anthony Harris was running such a screwed up operation. So recently, in the world of 2077, Harris was subjected to a routine car search, during which the NCPD discovered one of his victims, along with evidence of several others. Prior to this, as is often the case with serial killers, there wasn't any inkling that this guy had any issues. Unfortunately, as Harris attempted to flee the damning scene, he wound up with a bullet wound to the head, placing him in a coma so deep he wasn't even dreaming at first. This meant that the NCPD weren't able to interrogate him and couldn't ascertain the locations of his other victims, including River's nephew Randy. Now, since I'm sure most of you know this story well enough by now, I'll jump ahead a bit. We eventually, of course, learn all about Harris's screwed up operation by the means through which he first contacts and then continually messages Randy. See, Harris had a page set up on the net called Drugs Are Bad, designed to get the attention of vulnerable struggling teenagers just like Randy. Within the page then was embedded another link to a site called Tony's Shelter, a place for people to become the best version of themselves, with Harris asking them to think of him as a farmer looking after his livestock. I'd ask who would actually fall for this stuff, but at the start of the video we literally paid 20 grand to get a spiked BD and harvested by scabs, so I can see why this higher tier form of scam does in fact work quite effectively. Harris goes on to describe the notion of the vulnerable receiving a secret special treatment which will make them superhuman. And of course, the more we analyze this with hindsight, the more deeply screwed up it is. Clearly, Randy did fall for this, and a little later on at Edgewood Farm, we can read his first communication with Harris. Randy discusses how he feels like a waste of air and space, how he's poor, his dad's gone, he feels like he has no value in life, and can't talk about how he feels with anyone. It's understandable, in that context, why he forms a bond with Anthony Harris, who straight up confirms that he has failed in life, but that acknowledging it is the first step to moving forward. He cements Randy's position of weakness before presenting himself as a means to gain strength. It's a method he's read about on a shard in his house entitled Manipulation, easier than you think. He's also read the shard Understanding Your Teen, which says to make the teenager feel like you're the only one who understands, and he's read one called The Joy of Influence, 5 Simple Rules, including things like demanding engagement, whilst often also being unavailable. We can see these methods back at Randy's place, with Harris claiming he couldn't call due to being stuck in traffic, but then other times often emailing Randy with things out of the blue. Hell, he even uses admin privileges in his site to find Randy's home address, covering up the weirdness of it by sending him a gift. Eventually, we do get to watch some of Harris's dreams, providing a contorted context to eventually becoming the man, or the monster, that he is in 2077. Anthony's life as a kid on Edgewood Farm was tough, even abusive, one could say. His father ruled with an iron fist and was seemingly constantly angry.
I was gonna die because of you. Gonna kill it like you killed your mama.
I'm sorry.
Don't apologize, just dial up her hormones.
Of course, like with many abusive relationships, this did not result in Harris hating his father, but instead generated a fixation on doing exactly what his father taught him, even within context where doing so is completely and utterly wrong.
He wouldn't eat, stayed in his shell. I just wanted to help him.
By injecting him with HGH? What were you thinking? Is this something your father taught you?
He was sick, weak. I just wanted to help him.
Flash forward to now, and Harris's obsession has gone from injecting turtles with HGH to doing the same with teenagers. And when we get to this point, it is just straight up obtusely disturbing, like some true crime drama designed to make the audience squirm.
Tony'll take good care of you. Easy now.
Okay, arriving at Edgewood Farm then, Harris has this place guarded to an insane degree, and if we come down south of it a little bit, not right now because River will die, but beforehand or later, we can actually find someone else who investigated this place before. Darius Loaf was a reporter for World News who figured the random farm in the middle of nowhere might have a good story sitting inside it. How very right he was. Just a shame the place had turrets and landmines, since otherwise Randy and the others could have been found a lot sooner, and perhaps more would have survived. Instead, Darius is shot and bleeds out in his car, only to be discovered by a Griffin drone and possibly us a while later. Back inside the farm are even more clues, things which point to just how much Harris treated these boys like livestock, like cattle. And by pressing the secret button under the desk of his house, we can uncover his secret room, housing the Tinkerbell melee weapon, a literal cattle prod. It's also likely he branded his victims and eventually shot them in the head. That's something which can be learned by reading this news article displayed randomly around Night City, entitled Meat Man Strikes Again. Yet another villain name for Harris alongside Peter Pan. Inside the barn then, of course, is the straight up horrific scene. And luckily, by the time we're there, everything is in place to put a stop to this madness and save as many of the victims as we can. No doubt, some of these are the others we read about on Harris's computer. And this guy was persistent. One patient, Finnegan, did have an illness but recovered, at which point Harris decided to change tack by offering rehabilitative care. Not consolation of the soul, but allegedly healing of the body. Whether or not one of these guys is Finnegan remains unclear, but given that there was no reply to this email, hopefully he was smart enough to leave Harris in the dust. So, provided you picked the right farm and kept River alive, Randy will be saved. And in the end, River decides that despite comatose, Harris will still die by his hand. Not exactly necessary anymore, the guy's already a vegetable, but you can very much understand River's motivation here. Eventually though, he does confirm that he didn't go through with it, ultimately leaving Harris alive with a 0.6% chance to wake up. A 0.6% chance then that he crops up in the sequel. Though if anything, I think if they ever revisit this storyline, it's probably going to make more sense for it to be a copycat. Or who knows, maybe somebody's going to clone a legion of the most screwed up degenerate scumbags in Night City. Maybe that's Biotechnica's next plan. Though that sounds more like the sort of thing which happens in Gotham, not Night City. Anyway, the hunt. Disturbing? Yes, so much so, at both surface level and when we dive a little deeper into the details. Now, you might be wondering why I haven't mentioned Dream On in this video, and that's because A, I already went through the quest in top 5 side quests, and B, I'll be exploring the wider conspiracies around that one in another video more centered around disturbing conspiracies. But yes, Dream On definitely sits up here alongside these ones, I agree. And there's no doubt this future is in many ways morally fucked, and maybe Phantom Liberty will let us dive even deeper down the dystopian rabbit hole of a world where most people have just stopped caring. I say most, but to leave it on a slightly more uplifting note, I would still ultimately argue that forming bonds of friendship and love are key tenets to this game, and ultimately are the means by which we attain slightly more desirable outcomes by the end. Thank you for watching, and a huge thanks, as always, to all the supporters over on Patreon for helping me to make videos like this full-time. To anyone else interested, you can donate from as little as £1 a month for your name in each video, early access to content, and, when I eventually set it up, also Discord ranks. Equally, if you're planning on buying Phantom Liberty, or anything off the GOG store in the future, you can support the channel more passively by doing so through my affiliate link in the description. That's all for today. I'm Sam Brown, and I'll see you soon in another video.